such. What strikes you about the asymmetry of this attack? Hamas, after all, very weak compared to the IDF. Terrorism is always the weapon of the weak. Yet they were able to pull off something quite extraordinary, partly because of the surprise and the brutality, right?
You know, Fareed, I think this war will be studied by intelligence services all over the world. You know, let me start by saying a lot of people are saying this is Israel's 9/11. That's just silly. 9/11 was a complete unimagined event that people would turn airliners into suicide bombs. This was completely anticipated. This was completely expected. Israel had built $1 billion wall to prevent this. So the fact that that wall was breached by a bulldozer, by Palestinian Hamas people in little cars, driving their own cars. How did that happen, number one? How did they maintain surprise? This was a very complex, sophisticated attack involving sea, land, and air drones. It had been planned over a long period of time. Did they not use cell phones? Were those cell phones masked some way? Maybe with the help of Iran? I have no idea. So we need to understand how this basically, very small force armed with just enough technology managed to surprise and overwhelm what is considered one of the most technologically savvy militaries in the world.
You had been writing for a while about this new right-wing Israeli government and its actions in the West Bank. It has members of it who talk about annexing all of the West Bank and Gaza. Do you think this played a role in the sort of backdrop of this attack?
Fareed, there will be one day, I'm sure, some kind of inquiry commission on this war. And if I got to write indictment number one, it would go to Israel's Justice Minister, Yariv Levin. Remember that name, Y-A-R-I-V. Levine. He is the man who drove this insane, corrupt, dishonest effort to basically take over the power of the Supreme Court under the name of judicial review. And when he did, with Netanyahu's help, he fractured Israel. He fractured Israeli society. He fractured the Israeli military. He fractured the Israeli Air Force. He triggered almost 40 weeks of 100,000 Israelis coming out every Saturday night to protest this. Last week, I actually quoted an Israeli former Defense Department official as saying, our preparation has been harmed by this whole fracture of our society. That's where this started. And if I get to write the indictment, he will be the indicted person number one. But Netanyahu enabled him.
And tell me, I got to get you on the broader issues. What does this mean for the Saudi deal, for normalization? It would seem that it becomes much more complicated because now you have inflamed passions on the Arab street, as they say. Or do you think the Saudis don't care about that and they're looking at it practically and there it is to their advantage?
I think, Fareed, in the long run, their interests are in normalization with Israel, and those interests will prevail in the long run. But in the short run, this war between Hamas and Israel makes that impossible. I believe if Iran didn't stimulate or encourage it, it sure understands it's a huge beneficiary of that. The last thing Iran wanted was a U.S., Saudi, Israel strategic alliance to counterbalance Iran. So right now, that's no longer possible.
The IDF has said that they want to take control of Gaza. I assume they mean this temporarily, but your colleague, Bret Stephens, has written in the Times today, the IDF should expel Hamas from Gaza. I'm not sure where they would go, but he then proposes a kind of Egyptian, Saudi, UAE peacekeeping force that would essentially rule Gaza, I would guess. Is there, what happens to Gaza? Is that a possibility? Because it's difficult to imagine Israel just beating up a bunch of Palestinians in Gaza and then withdrawing back into Israel again.
Fareed, always remember who got Israel out of Gaza. It's Arch Hawk, one of its most celebrated military commanders, Ariel Sharon. He understood that it is just an incredible quagmire. And that's why Netanyahu, all these years, 15 years as prime minister, has never wanted to go in. So I think we have to be very, very careful. And asking other people, I mean, I love Brett, but asking other people to be peacekeeping forces in Gaza, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, they can barely manage their own border with the Houthis. The idea that Israel would turn its security over to third-party Arab armies, I just don't see that. So this is going to be very difficult, because what the Israelis are going to try to do, Fareed, is they're going to try to restore their deterrence, which they understand has been broken here. They're going to do some very, very, very harsh things in Gaza. I have no doubt about that. Whether that involves a reoccupation, I don't know, but they're going to do some very harsh things. The United States is going to be asked to support that. The world is going to be asked to support that. And all I know is this, Fareed. If Israel is going to ask the world to do that, it is going to, first of all, Netanyahu is going to have to break up this crazy, insane cabinet he has assembled. He's going to have to boot out his national security minister. National security minister of Israel is today a guy who was so, unfit. The Israeli army wouldn't take him when he was a young man. Netanyahu's got to stop playing politics and start understanding he's a war of survival. And if he wants the world to support him, he's got to clean up his act big time, build a national unity cabinet of serious people, moderate people, because Israel's going to do some very tough stuff, Fareed, and it's not going to be easy for the world to take, and they're certainly not going to do it if he's got in his cabinet people who are absolute arsonists.
Tom Friedman, pleasure. Thanks to everyone for being part of my program this week, and I will see you next week.